Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the stories. Number the return, the radio crackled to life at 300 hours, jolting me from my half-sleep in the command chair. 3 months into my posting at Coldwater Station, the graveyard shift had become a monotonous blur of routine checks and lukewarm coffee. Coast Guard Station, Coldwater, this is USCG Cutter Reliant. We're responding to a distress call approximately 20 nautical miles southeast of your position. Over. I straightened in my chair, fumbling for the handset. Reliant, this is Coldwater. Copy your transmission. What's the situation? Over. Coldwater, we've got unusual circumstances. 3 survivors recovered from what appears to be a life raft, claiming to be from the cargo vessel Meridian Star. Request you prepare medical facilities. ETA your station approximately 90 minutes. Over. I frowned, reaching for the station database. Copy that. Reliant, medical will be standing by. Meridian Star, you said. Over. Affirmative. Coldwater, Meridian Star. Out. The name tickled something in my memory. I tapped it into our database, and when the results appeared, I felt a cold wave wash over me. The Meridian Star had vanished in a storm off the Pacific Northwest coast in 1973, 51 years ago. I rechecked the data, certain I'd misunderstood or the survivors had confused their vessel's name. But there it was, Meridian Star, 45 zero-ton cargo ship, lost with all hands January 17, 1973. I radioed back, Reliant, Coldwater here, can you confirm the vessel name again? Over. Coldwater, this is Reliant, confirmed. Meridian Star. Survivors are in poor condition but coherent. 2 men, 1 woman. All appear to be in their 30s. Out. The impossible had just become my problem. By the time I'd alerted the medical staff and notified my commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Hayes, dawn was breaking over the horizon in streaks of pale orange and pink. Hayes arrived looking like he'd dressed in the dark, which he probably had. Petty Officer Marlowe, he greeted me, accepting the coffee I offered. Run this by me again. Sir, Cutter Reliant recovered 3 survivors claiming to be from the Meridian Star. They're bringing them here instead of the mainland hospital because of the unusual circumstances. And the unusual circumstance is that their ship sank half a century ago. Hayes didn't phrase it as a question. Yes, sir. I've pulled the records. The Meridian Star went down in a storm in 73. No survivors, no mayday, just disappeared. Some debris washed up a week later, but that was it. Hayes sipped his coffee, grimacing at either the taste or the situation. Most likely explanation, confused survivors, sir. Maybe they're from a recent shipwreck and suffering from exposure, hypothermia. The mind does strange things under duress. And the least likely explanation, I hesitated. That they're actually from the Meridian Star. Hayes nodded slowly. Let's stick with the most likely until proven otherwise. I want you to handle the initial interviews once medical clears them. You've got the historical knowledge, and frankly, I don't want to deal with the paperwork if this turns out to be some elaborate hoax. Yes, sir. Hayes turned to leave, then paused. Marlowe, you've been at Coldwater for what, 3 months now? Yes, sir. You know why they call this stretch of coast the graveyard of the Pacific? Strong currents, unpredictable weather, rocky shorelines, I recited. That's the official explanation, Hayes said, his voice dropping slightly. Locals will tell you there's something else out there, something that doesn't let go of what it takes. Before I could ask what he meant, the radio crackled again. Coldwater, this is Reliant. We're approaching your position. Request docking instructions. Over. Hayes left me to coordinate the arrival, his cryptic warning lingering in the air like the morning mist. The survivors were brought in on stretchers, each wrapped in thermal blankets despite the mild spring morning. Dr. Patel, our station's medical officer, directed them to our small infirmary. I followed, notebook in hand, ready to make sense of whatever story they were about to tell. They're suffering from exposure and dehydration, Dr. Patel told me as her team worked. The woman has a broken wrist that appears to have healed improperly some time ago. Otherwise, their physical condition is remarkable considering they claim to have been adrift for some time. I approached the first bed where a man with salt and pepper hair lay staring at the ceiling. His skin had the leathery quality of someone who'd spent years at sea, but his eyes seemed to reflect depths I couldn't fathom. Sir, I'm Petty Officer Marlowe with the U.S. Coast Guard. Can you tell me your name? He turned to look at me, his gaze sharpening. First Officer Thomas Reeves, Meridian Star. We went down. How long have we been out there? Mr. Reeves, I said gently, can you tell me what year it is? His brow furrowed. 1973, January I think. We left Seattle on the 15th. I nodded, making notes. Confusion about time was consistent with prolonged exposure and trauma. And what's the last thing you remember before being rescued? The storm, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Waves higher than the bridge. Captain ordered us to abandon ship, but he trailed off, his gaze drifting back to the ceiling. The others, there were more of us in the raft. Where are they? Just the three of you were found, I said. Can you tell me who was with you in the raft? Reeves' eyes widened. They took them. One by one, they took them. In the fog, who took them, Mr. Reeves? The others, he whispered. The ones below, they come up when it's foggy. They reach out of the water with hands like seaweed and, he made a grabbing motion, then closed his eyes. You think I'm crazy? I think you've been through a traumatic experience, I said diplomatically. Rest now, we'll talk more later. I moved to the second survivor, a woman with dark hair cut in a style that did indeed seem reminiscent of the early 1970s. Her eyes followed me as I approached. Ma'am, I'm Petty Officer Marlowe. Can you tell me your name? Dr. Leaner Vance, she replied, her voice stronger than Reeves. I was the ship's physician on the Meridian Star. What day is it? I decided to be direct. It's April 12, 2024. She didn't react with shock or disbelief. Instead, she nodded slowly. 51 years. That tracks with the cycles. What cycles, Dr. Vance? The deep cycles, the ocean's memory. She held up her injured wrist. I broke this trying to pull Martinez back into the raft. They were stronger than me. The returned. The ones who went before, they want company. She leaned closer. We weren't the first and we won't be the last. It's cyclical, you see. The ocean gives back what it takes, but never completely, never the same. I made more notes, increasingly convinced I was dealing with shared delusion, perhaps induced by their traumatic experience. Dr. Vance, do you remember how long you were in the life raft? Time doesn't work right out there, she said. Sometimes it was day for what felt like weeks. Sometimes night lasted even longer. The fog was the worst. That's when they would come. I moved to the third survivor, a younger man with a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. Unlike the others, he seemed agitated, constantly scanning the room. Sir, I'm Petty Officer Marlowe. Yes, I heard, he interrupted. Michael Chen, Communications Officer. And before you ask, yes, I know it's supposedly 2024, which is impossible, but here we are. His directness caught me off guard. Mr. Chen, can you tell me what happened to the Meridian Star? Officially, we sank in a storm. He leaned forward. Unofficially, something found us. Something that's been down there for centuries, collecting. And now it's letting us go because it's time for another collection. Another collection. Chen's eyes met mine, and I felt a chill run through me. You've been having more disappearances lately, haven't you? Ships going missing without distress calls, that's how it starts. I thought of the 3 vessels that had vanished in the past month, an unusual cluster even for the treacherous waters of the Pacific Northwest. We'd found debris but no survivors, no bodies. That's just coincidence, I said, more to reassure myself than to counter his claim. There are no coincidences at sea, Chen replied. Only patterns we haven't recognized yet. After completing my initial interviews, I returned to my station to compile my report. The survivors' stories aligned in uncanny ways. All described the same storm, the same sequence of events leading to the sinking, and similar experiences in the life raft. If this was a hoax or a shared delusion, it was remarkably consistent. I pulled up more detailed records on the Meridian Star. The cargo manifest listed routine industrial equipment bound for Japan. The crew manifest showed 27 souls aboard, including Thomas Reeves, Leaner Vance, and Michael Chen. My hand froze over the keyboard. The photographs in the personnel files matched our survivors, not just resembled them, but matched them exactly, down to Chen's distinctive scar. According to these records, First Officer Thomas Reeves was 34 in 1973. The man in our infirmary appeared to be the same age. I printed the files and brought them to Hayes, who studied them with increasing concern. This isn't possible, he said finally. No, sir, it isn't, I agreed. Yet the evidence suggests nothing. Hayes cut me off. These people, whoever they are, have gone to extraordinary lengths to perpetrate this. This whatever it is, I'm contacting headquarters to have them transferred to the mainland for psychological evaluation. Sir, with respect, I think we should hear them out. What, Marlowe? What if they really are 50-year-old survivors who haven't aged a day? What if the ocean just decided to spit them back out after half a century? Hayes shook his head. I'm a practical man. I deal in facts, not ghost stories. Then how do you explain the matching photographs, the consistent accounts? Hayes sighed. I can't, not yet, but there's a rational explanation and we'll find it. In the meantime, continue your interviews, see if you can catch them in a contradiction. That evening I returned to the infirmary. Dr. Patel met me at the door, her expression troubled. Something odd, Petty Officer. Their blood work came back with some inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? She handed me the report. Their blood contains trace elements not typically found in human blood, and the cellular structure shows signs of preservation, for lack of a better term, almost like they've been in a state of suspended animation. Is there a medical explanation for that? Not one I'm familiar with, she hesitated. There's something else. Their body temperatures are consistently below normal, about 95 degrees, and they don't seem to be producing body heat the way they should. I thought of Hayes and his insistence on rational explanations. Could it be some kind of metabolic disorder? Perhaps, she said, not sounding convinced, but all three exhibiting the exact same symptoms. That's statistically improbable. Inside the infirmary, the survivors were sitting up in their beds, looking stronger than they had that morning. They turned to me in unison as I entered, their movements eerily synchronized. "You've seen our files," Chen said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I admitted. "They match you perfectly, which is impossible." "No more impossible than us being here at all," Vance replied. "You're starting to believe us, aren't you?" "I'm keeping an open mind," I said carefully. "If you are who you say you are, then how do you explain not aging in 51 years? Reeves spoke up. "Time works differently in the deep. We weren't just floating on the surface all this time." "What does that mean?" "It means," Chen said, "that what took the Meridian Star keeps what it takes, sometimes in the depths, sometimes elsewhere, and sometimes it gives back what it's taken. But there's always a price." "What price?" The three exchanged glances before Vance answered. "We're not the only ones who have returned. There have been others throughout history. Ships and crews thought lost forever, suddenly reappearing decades or centuries later." "The Flying Dutchman myth," I said skeptically. "All myths have origins in truth," Reeves said. "The returned are harbingers. Warnings of what's to come, and what's coming." "A taking," Chen said simply. "A great taking. It's been 50 years since the last one. The cycle is complete. It's hungry again." I felt a chill run down my spine despite the warmth of the room. "Who is it?" "Not who," Vance corrected. "What? Something ancient. Something that was here long before humans sailed these waters and will be here long after we're gone." "You expect me to believe some kind of sea monster sank your ship and has kept you in suspended animation for half a century?" "Not a monster," Reeves said. "At least not in the way you're thinking. It's more like a force, a consciousness spread throughout the deep. It doesn't hate or love, it simply is, and part of what it is involves taking and returning." "Why would it return you now?" "To witness," Chen said. "To warn, though it doesn't care whether the warning is heeded. It's simply part of the pattern." "Warn about what?" "The taking that's coming," Vance said. "It's already begun with those 3 ships that vanished recently." "But that's just the beginning." I stood up, unnerved by their certainty. "I think that's enough for tonight. You should rest." As I turned to leave, Reeves called after me. "Check the weather forecast, Petty Officer Marlowe. The fog is coming." That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in my quarters, the survivors' words echoing in my mind. Around 2 a.m., I gave up and went to the station's operations center. The night duty officer, Petty Officer Ramirez, looked up in surprise. "Marlowe, you're not on until 600. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Thought I'd check on our guests. The doc gave them something to help them rest." "They're out cold." Ramirez paused. "Strange business that. Hayes thinks they're running some kind of scam, but I don't know what angle they'd be working." "Neither do I." I glanced at the weather monitors. "What's the forecast looking like?" Ramirez pulled up the meteorological data. "Clear now, but there's a fog bank developing offshore. Should roll in around dawn, according to this." "The fog is coming." I suppressed a shiver. "Anything unusual on the radar?" "All quiet, just the usual shipping traffic." Ramirez gave me a curious look. "Why, expecting trouble?" "Just being thorough," I said, not meeting his eyes. I spent the next few hours reviewing everything we had on the Meridian Star and the 3 recent disappearances. The patterns were subtle but undeniable. All 4 vessels had vanished in roughly the same area. All had been lost in January or April, exactly 51 years apart for the Meridian Star. As dawn approached, I went outside to the observation deck. The air was still, unnaturally so, and the first tendrils of fog were creeping in from the horizon, exactly as Reeves had predicted. My radio crackled. "Marlowe, this is Ramirez. You'd better get back here. We've got multiple distress signals coming in." I ran back to the operations center, where Ramirez was coordinating with 2 Coast Guard cutters already at sea. 3 commercial fishing vessels and a pleasure craft all reporting the same thing, Ramirez told me. Extreme weather conditions appearing out of nowhere, massive swells, and, he hesitated, and what? And something in the water. Something big. Before I could respond, the lights flickered, then stabilized. The radio crackled with static, voices breaking through in fragments. ... coming up from below. Not natural. All around us, then silence. "We've lost contact," Ramirez said, his voice tight. "All 4 vessels, simultaneously." The door burst open, and Hayes strode in, fully uniformed despite the early hour. "Status report." As Ramirez briefed him, I slipped away to the infirmary. Something told me our mysterious survivors would have insights we desperately needed. The infirmary was dark when I entered, illuminated only by the dim emergency lighting. The 3 beds were empty, their occupants nowhere to be seen. "Dr. Patel," I called out, no response. I found her in her office, slumped over her desk. For a heart-stopping moment I thought she was dead, but when I touched her shoulder she stirred groggily. "Petty Officer Marlowe, what?" She blinked in confusion. "The survivors, doctor, where are they?" "I gave them sedatives," she mumbled. "They should be asleep. They're gone." That seemed to wake her fully. "That's not possible. Those sedatives would keep an elephant down." A cold realization washed over me. Unless they're not affected by sedatives the way normal people are. We searched the station, but there was no sign of Reeves, Vance, or Chen. It was as if they had vanished into the fog that now enveloped Coldwater Station completely, reducing visibility to mere feet. When I returned to operations, the situation had deteriorated further. 2 more vessels had sent distress signals before going silent. The Coast Guard cutters dispatched to investigate the first disappearances were reporting instrument malfunctions and were returning to base. "It's the fog," I said, drawing looks from Hayes and Ramirez. "They warned me about the fog." "Who warned you?" Hayes demanded. "The survivors. They said it was all part of a cycle, a taking." Hayes' expression hardened. "Marlowe, I don't have time for." He was interrupted by a thunderous boom that shook the entire station. The lights went out completely, plunging us into darkness until the emergency generators kicked in seconds later. "What the hell was that?" Ramirez asked. I moved to the window. Through the dense fog, I could make out massive waves crashing against the shore, waves far larger than the calm weather conditions should have produced. "Sir," I said to Hayes, "I think we need to evacuate the station." To my surprise, he didn't argue. "Ramirez, sound the evacuation alarm. All personnel to the helicopter pad." "I'll contact air support." As Ramirez moved to comply, Hayes pulled me aside. "What did they tell you, Marlowe, the survivors?" "That something in the deep takes ships and crews in cycles. That they were returned as harbingers of a new taking." Hayes' face paled. "The old stories, the ones the local tribes told, about the hunger in the deep that wakes every 50 years. You knew about this." "I knew the legends." "I didn't believe them." He looked out at the unnatural fog. "I do now." The evacuation alarm blared throughout the station. Personnel rushed to gather essential equipment and make their way to the helicopter pad on the station's roof. I followed Hayes through the corridors, the emergency lights casting everything in an eerie red glow. We were halfway to the stairs leading to the roof when the building shook again, more violently this time. Water began seeping under doors and through cracks in the walls, not the normal seepage of a coastal facility, but a deliberate intrusion, as if the ocean itself were forcing its way in. "Move," Hayes shouted, pushing me ahead of him as a wave of seawater burst through a door behind us, flooding the corridor. We reached the stairs and climbed, the water rising rapidly below us. On the roof, most of the station's personnel had already assembled. The fog was even thicker here, swirling around us in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "Air support is 10 minutes out," Ramirez reported, water dripping from his uniform. "We may not have 10 minutes, Hayes replied grimly. I moved to the edge of the roof, peering through the fog at the ocean below. What I saw made my blood run cold. The water surrounding Coldwater Station wasn't behaving like water should. It rose in columns and spirals, defying gravity and natural fluid dynamics. And within those columns I could see shapes, human shapes, moving with the water but distinct from it. "Sir," I called to Hayes, my voice shaking. "You need to see this." He joined me at the edge, Ramirez following. Both men fell silent as they observed the impossible scene below. "Those are people," Ramirez whispered. "In the water, not people," I corrected. Not anymore. As we watched, one of the water columns rose higher, bringing its occupant level with the roof. Through the fog and spray, I recognized Michael Chen, his expression serene despite being suspended in a column of seawater 30 feet above sea level. "The cycle continues," Chen said, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the roar of the water. "The deep remembers, the deep returns, the deep takes." More columns rose around the building, each containing a figure. I recognized Reeves and Vance among them, but also others, faces I'd seen only in photographs of crews lost at sea over the decades. "What do you want?" Hayes shouted. "One implies desire," Vance replied, her voice as clear as Chen's despite the impossibility of her situation. "It doesn't want, it simply is, and what it is requires balance." "Balance?" I asked. "For each returning a taking," Reeves explained. "We came back, so others must go. That is the pattern, that is the cycle." The building shuddered beneath our feet, concrete cracking as the foundation began to give way. "The helicopter," someone shouted, and I looked up to see the rescue chopper emerging from the fog above us, its rotors beating back the mist momentarily. "Go," Hayes ordered, organizing the evacuation as the helicopter hovered precariously above the heaving roof. Personnel began boarding via the rescue hoist, 2 at a time. Hayes pushed me toward the front of the line. "I should stay until everyone's aboard," I protested. "That's my job," he countered. "You need to tell the story. Make sure people understand what's happening here." Before I could argue further, the building lurched violently. A massive crack split the roof, separating Hayes and several others from the rest of us. "Hayes," I shouted, lunging toward him, but Ramirez held me back. "It's too late," he yelled over the roar of water and concrete. Hayes stood on the far side of the rapidly widening gap, water already swirling around his feet. Behind him, the water columns had multiplied, dozens of figures now visible in their translucent depths. "Remember the cycle, Marlowe," Hayes called across the divide. 51 years. Warn them, then he was gone, the section of roof collapsing into the churning water below. The helicopter pilot, seeing the imminent destruction of the entire facility, lowered the rescue hoist one last time. Ramirez and I were the last to board before the aircraft pulled away. From the air, we watched as Coldwater Station was claimed by the sea, not in the normal fashion of flooding and submersion, but as if it were being deliberately dismantled and pulled into the depths. The water columns rose higher, their occupants watching impassively as the structure disappeared piece by piece. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The water calmed, the unnatural waves subsided, and the fog began to disperse. Within minutes, there was no sign that Coldwater Station had ever existed, save for a few pieces of debris floating on the surface. But as the helicopter turned toward the mainland, I looked back one last time. In the clearing mist, I saw them, dozens of life rafts dotting the now calm sea, each filled with people. Survivors from vessels lost over the decades, returned from the deep as harbingers of the next great taking, 51 years from now. And I understood then what Hayes had meant. I had to warn them. I had to make them understand the cycle, the pattern, the balance that must be maintained between the world above and the ancient consciousness that dwelled below. But as our helicopter flew toward shore, I couldn't help but wonder, would anyone believe me? Or would my story be dismissed as the ravings of a traumatized Coast Guard officer? Would the cycle continue uninterrupted because humanity refused to acknowledge the patterns right before their eyes? The water columns had receded, the fog had cleared, but I knew the truth now. The ocean gives back what it takes, but never completely, never the same. And what it had given back to me was a terrible knowledge I could never unlearn. We are not alone in the deep, and sometimes the deep reaches back.